Hi, I'm Jim Brulé, and I'm here for tonight's edition of Stories for Healing. As those of you who have been following us know, this is something we're doing twice a day at 2:30 and 8 o'clock Eastern Time, every day. The reason we're doing this is because it seemed to me that what we really need right now is healing. We know that there's a tremendous amount of divisiveness in the world, fear and anger, worry, and we're breaking up into groups that seem to find it very difficult to speak to each other. And that's not just true of this country, it's true in our communities, it's true in the world. And as storytellers, we have an urge to heal. We have an urge to let people see the world through another person's eyes, real or imagined. And really, when we do start to see the world through another's eyes, well, that's when we start to heal. They can heal and we can heal, and it all comes together. And so tonight, now that we've passed one more milestone on this really amazingly difficult election process here in this country, but again, this goes beyond our world, I wanted to share a story of healing that I think fits particularly well. Now, as some of you have noticed, I tend to tell Jewish stories. Now, the first two I told were not. One was Buddhist, one was Muslim. But today I have a Jewish story to tell. And it's a story about the Baal Shem Tov, who was the founder of the mystical branch of Judaism known as Hasidism. And so it's a story about him and his relationship to some of his disciples. Now it helps to know that on Rosh Hashanah, not only do we start a new year, but the mystics tell us that that's when the fate of the world for the next year is determined. And so Jews around the world gather for prayers that last all day. In fact, they last for 10 days. But on Rosh Hashanah, it's one of the two most powerful days of those 10. And because the prayers last so long, it was a custom at the time for the Hasids to have a little snuff box, to sniff a little tobacco and help them wake up and be a little clearer headed, and it got them through the day. So on this one Rosh Hashanah, this one Jew is sitting in the back of the congregation, trying to keep up, and he's getting a little drowsy, and he knows he needs some snuff, so he reaches into his robe to pull out the box, and he's just a little too tired. And he drops the box, and it clatters onto the floor, disturbing everyone. Well, of course, he makes his apologies, and he picks it up. But there was one person sitting further up. Normally, in this case, this man was normally much more elevated than this. But in this one particular case, he got irritated beyond belief. And he thought to himself, why, oh why, is that man using tobacco at such a holy day? And he was really irritated. Now, he didn't say anything, but his soul was just angry. Now, because on Rosh Hashanah, the gates of heaven, we're told, are especially open to prayer, that prayer reached the heavenly tribunal, who was at that time preparing the fate of each individual for the year. And the strength of this learned man's anger at this transgression by this other man was so great that it was decreed that this other man would lose his life in the year, that this would be the last year for him to live. Now the Baal Shem Tov is a very, very holy and mystical man, and he knew the minute that happened, he knew that such a decree had been issued. And so he made a soul ascent up to the heavenly court to plead the case, to say, how can you condemn this man to death for such a minor crime? The heavenly court said, well, look at the strength of the accusation. It is so strong. It comes from such a holy person. It has to be that way. And argue as he might, back and forth, the Baal Shem Tov could not convince the court to release their decree. And so he went back to earth. Now, he wasn't about to give up. He felt that he had to try again. So on the next time that he could make such a great holy ascent, about 3 weeks later, he did so. And he came back with even more fervor and more passion, asking the holy tribunal to change their decree, for now it had been written. And at first they were as unrelenting as they had been the first time, but the Baal Shem Tov pressed until finally they said, on one condition, that the accuser, of his own free will, find a reason in his own understanding why using snuff and tobacco on the high holidays is not a bad thing. But you can't tell him to say that. He must come to that conclusion on his own. It must be genuine. And the Baal Shem Tov was quite grateful, and he descended back to earth. Now, on that day that he had ascended, it's called Hoshana Rabbah. It's one of the days when the gates are again open, and also it was the Baal Shem Tov's custom to take questions from people on that day. So as he came back to earth, he approached the accuser without him realizing it and made him confused. The accuser had been studying some very deep mystical texts, and when the Baal Shem Tov did this, unbeknownst to him, he found himself unable to study. And so to try to clear his mind, he thought about other problems that maybe were a little easier to work on, and it came to him, in his confusion that, well, maybe some tobacco might help, and that reminded him of that day on Rosh Hashanah. And he started to question to himself, why? Why would it be good to have tobacco? And it occurred to him that there were people who could not concentrate as well as he was used to being able to. And he thought maybe that's the reason. Wasn't sure. And since it was a day when the Baal Shem Tov entertained questions, he went to the Baal Shem Tov and he said, can you tell me why does the Holy One permit the use of tobacco on Rosh Hashanah? And the Baal Shem Tov said, well, you tell me, what do you think? He said, well, it seems to me that, sometimes people have difficulty concentrating, and it certainly does help, so maybe that's the reason. And the Baal Shem Tov looked at him and said, what makes you think of that question, of all the questions you might bring to me? And the Chassid looked at him and he said, and the awareness dawned to him. On Rosh Hashanah, there was a fellow who dropped a snuff box, and it really irritated me. But I see now that he had a good reason for doing that, and that It wasn't improper at all. And in that moment, the Baal Shem Tov knew that the decree against that poor Hasid had been nullified. You know, friends, sometimes things look to be irrefutably wrong, and sometimes they are wrong, at least from our point of view. And even if we think they're wrong from every point of view, we do have to understand why someone else might adopt a position that seems so clearly wrong to us. It doesn't mean we have to change what we think is right and wrong. But we do have to ask ourselves, is this the only way of understanding the world? Seems to be a challenge that we all should undertake right now, no matter where we stand. And my fervent prayer for each of us is that we can start to open our hearts to see the world in more than one way, without giving up what we hold dear and true, but to look beneath for what is the real, dear, true value underneath it all. So today's Stories for Healing. You have another from me. And again, we continue this twice a day at 2:30 in the afternoon and 8 o'clock in the evening. That's Eastern Time, every day of the week. It's on Facebook Live at those times. And then shortly thereafter, it's placed onto YouTube. The playlist is listed on our page. If you can't find it, just search for Transformational Storytelling and you'll find it there on YouTube. Thank you. I invite you to return, to bring others to this mode of healing, to listen to the stories of others, and to tell your own with an open heart. Until the next time, this is Jim Brulé. Thank you.